What's up, guys? Today we're going to be talking about Dexter, the entire franchise, the books, the TV shows, New Blood, what I would love to see, what they were going to do after the original 8 seasons, and just everything in between. But these videos are just kind of a culmination of a lot of the stuff that I posted on this channel before that you can no longer find, so I just wanted to be able to put them up some way. Before we get into it, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Hit that bell over by the notification button to notify you every single time I upload, because quite frankly, it means nothing to you, but it means the world to me, guys. I love making content. I love talking with y'all in the comment section, so do your best to support the channel and, just talk with me. It helps. A like helps so much. So with that being said, I want to talk about this stuff. I want to put it at the back of the video. Y'all can go watch all of that. I'll have time codes in the description. But I also want to talk about Dexter Original Sin. I want to talk about Dexter Resurrection. I want to talk about the Trinity Killer spinoff. And we're going to have to do that in multiple videos sometime down the line, because there's just too much to get into it with this video, especially as long as it possibly is at this point. But with that being said, I want to hyper-focus on a specific thing about this interconnected universe, or at least the extension of the Dexter franchise, as it were, at Showtime over the last couple of months. And that is, I'm not entirely sure that Clyde Phillips or literally anybody at Showtime or on the Dexter team is in the right possible position to expand this universe. And I want to hyper-focus on that in a little bit, but I want to kind of clarify by saying I have been watching Dexter Original Sin, which is coming up on its finale, pretty soon here. I'm recording it beforehand. I have been focusing on this show for a very long time. I was very skeptical of it before it came out, the idea of replacing various characters that we had come to know and love with younger actors who were kind of put at a major disadvantage for television audiences or just general audiences at this point to come in, take on these characters that are so well established and make them their own. Not to mention the pitfalls of uprooting an entire continuity within the original 9 seasons of television and reworking it to fit a prequel idea, like incorporating scenes that we had seen played out within the first 2 seasons of Dexter, or incorporating concepts of characters that had been kind of sprinkled out or revealed over the course of 8 or 9 seasons of television. It was a lot to undertake, especially if that was going to be related to an ongoing continuation of the franchise with Michael C. Hall back in his role as the titular Dexter character. But here's kind of the kicker. Dexter Original Sin, at least for right now, again, I haven't seen how it ends, and obviously there is implication that it's going to continue beyond this particular season. The first 9 or so, almost at the entire end of the first season, are fucking phenomenal. I don't understand what it is, but Patrick Gibson and Molly Brown as Dexter and Debra, respectively, the 2 biggest parts of this show, I think, are nailing their individual characters. And that's not to say that pretty much every other character that's playing a pre-established character from the first 8 seasons of the show are hitting it out of the park on a week-to-week basis. In that sense, it's been phenomenal. I literally couldn't ask for anything else. But with that kind of comes a little bit of my criticism of Showtime, Clyde Phillips, and the idea of a television universe, as it were. I've talked about this a little bit on the channel before when it comes to the Walking Dead franchise, and how the continuation of any legitimate story, a story bigger than the individual characters, or at least worthy enough to span multiple years, if not generations, is something, at least in my opinion, that falls a little bit flat as a mega fan of any particular franchise. And that is, what is the overall point of telling this story? I've talked about this largely in the context of the Walking Dead franchise. That show, that entire universe, is interesting in the sense that it's just a never-ending zombie apocalypse story. The characters you followed since the very beginning back in 2010 within the television franchise, they're still alive, they're surviving, they're, thriving even, but there's no real hope for the future other than kind of what they make of it. There's no cure, there's no protection, there's no immunity, there's no nothing. It's just survival and people trying to be, dictators and fascists and whatever on the side, and they take care of them. Everything goes good for a while, and then another conflict rises up. And even despite all that, there's no real connective tissue or story between The Walking Dead, Fear the Walking Dead, Tales of the Walking Dead, The World Beyond, Daryl Dixon, Dead City, The Ones Who Live, and anything else that they want to tell within this gigantic universe on this side. When it comes to other ones that kind of make a little bit more sense to me, you have something like Yellowstone, which, yes, has its flaws. It took me so long to get into that universe, but to be fair, the idea of having one family story that takes place over the course of like hundreds of years and multiple generations just really made sense to me. The only problem with that was the original story was Yellowstone. What Taylor Sheridan wanted to do with the original story was end it within that generation and then go backwards and explain what happened going forward. So you get into a situation where 1883 is the best thing that Yellowstone ever did. Outside of maybe season 2 or 3 of Yellowstone, 1883 is a fantastic television show that you should definitely watch, especially since it's only one season. But then you get into something like 1923, which is an abysmal watch. One of the worst kind of continuations of any real extended franchise ever, especially with the star caliber involved. But at least you can see the progression exactly kind of like what they're doing, and season 2 could be better. But again, you get to the ending of what Yellowstone is, which obviously wasn't their intention. There's a lot going on there, but you get to the ending of what that show is and kind of the inevitable conclusion that they were building, but you also have the ability to go backwards in time and kind of explain this is the hardship that this generation had to go through. You know, you get to the Dust Belt and you get to the ideas of, the Great Depression and all this other stuff that they could still do in the future. But does that really matter if we all know kind of what the inevitable conclusion point is? You kind of lose your momentum. So to me, like, Yellowstone made a whole lot of sense as a television universe that didn't have to interconnect in a really interesting way to tell the story of one specific American family as they went through trials and tribulations over the course of multiple decades and generations and centuries in American history. But the thing about Dexter, especially when contrasting it against those two specific examples, is that it's not a story that possesses a ton of different characters that can lead their own individual spin-offs. Yes, there's the Trinity Killer spin-off that, quite frankly, I just don't see working. Arthur Mitchell as the Trinity Killer was an intense villain that punctuated the entirety of the first 8 seasons. He was so iconic that everyone loved him, and pretty much anybody who's a Dexter fan will say, yeah, look to season 4, that's really fucking awesome. You should stop there because it literally goes downhill from that point onward. A lot of people have differing opinions as to when that is, but we all know that it goes downhill after season 4. That being said, we pretty much get to see everything that's important about him within the confines of season 4. Not to say that there's not something that they can pull out of the woodwork and say, hey, this is part of his character, this makes him more sympathetic and onward. And as well as everything else, doing a prequel with him would help build up to the inevitable confrontation between him and Dexter in season 4. So you go back and you watch the Trinity show, you go back and watch Original Sin, Dexter 1, 2, and 3, and then season 4, you have all of the context between those two coming face to face, and it makes it a little bit more epic. But that's only if the Trinity show is as good as Dexter Original Sin, which, at least from the track record, is so far, like, it's possible, but again, putting a lot up in the air. With all that being said, I don't have a ton of faith that the Trinity Killer show is going to be as good or as much watched television as something like Original Sin, or as what I anticipate Resurrection is going to be. Also, going back to the Yellowstone example, this isn't an entire family's generational story, right? You're not focusing on multiple different time periods, multiple different people, and multiple different economic environments. You are focusing on solely Dexter. Pretty much the entirety of this universe is him. You have the first 8 seasons, you have New Blood, you have Original Sin, and then you have Resurrection. The Trinity Killer stuff is kind of off on its own thing. I can't imagine them doing a Miguel television show, the Skinner, maybe a Brian television show with everything going on in Original Sin, but quite frankly, that's pretty much off the table, at least from what I'm seeing right now. And then maybe you can do other things with people that were introduced from season 5 onward, but none of them have the general appeal of someone like a Trinity Killer, so we've already talked about why that might be dead on arrival. So here's kind of the question that I have. How is Dexter Original Sin going to tie into Dexter Resurrection? We've already had the stinger at the beginning of the season that kind of indicates how Dexter survived the events of Dexter New Blood, but that doesn't necessarily get us into what is driving the events of the Resurrection series. At the beginning of Dexter New Blood, we have Dexter on a hospital table talking about his life flashing before his eyes and seeing things in a brand new light. For me, it would be fantastic if there was something that happened at the ending of this season that gives Dexter some kind of context or reason to get back up and live again that leads directly into Dexter Resurrection. And then any continuation of Dexter Original Sin, which we've already been confirmed is potentially going to happen, will be Dexter in Dexter Resurrection recalling the events of his previous life to help kind of guide whatever he thinks he's searching for in Dexter Resurrection. For me, that's the only real reason why this extended universe can have any real meaningful connection, and both can exist simultaneously if they're feeding each other from one season to another. So Dexter Original Sin is him kind of being operated on, being worked on after the events of Dexter New Blood. Everything in his fever pitch dream is telling him the story of his life. And as that's going, something kind of occurs to him that sparks a memory that's like, oh, I forgot about this, or something about this really bugs me. And then he gets up and has to go find whatever that is in Dexter Resurrection. But then at the end of Dexter Resurrection, like, he has to kind of touch base with his younger self again. And that leads us into season 2 and so on and so forth. So even though these stories are not interconnected in the most meaningful way, they are at least talking to each other from one thing to another. This would also kind of work if you have Patrick Gibson just kind of come out of nowhere and talk to Dexter as his younger self in Dexter Resurrection. You know, just them kind of communicating with themselves, trying to work out the central mystery of Dexter Resurrection, or at least the drive of that original point, or at least very much the drive that kind of gets that series off the ground, and then you get into more interesting, situations and everything that would come with that. I don't know. I would love to see that. I have a whole lot of thoughts and opinions of what this extended universe could be. I don't want to get really bogged down in the specifics or what we could see in the future, because Dexter Original Sin's season finale could really upend a lot of the stuff I'm talking about right now. But again, I hope that there's a legitimate reason for this extended universe of content. My biggest problem with this is that Dexter was always kind of this middle child, and that's what Clyde Phillips kind of sees it as, where it's individual serialized storytelling per season, but not interconnected from season to season. In the same way that, I like to say that Breaking Bad and Dexter ended 1 week apart, and it's true, they did. Dexter started a little bit before Breaking Bad, and Dexter is legitimately just a show that has a serialized storytelling from season to season pretty much throughout its entire 8-season run. Yes, there's continuations and there's different character beats and stuff that follow from one season to another, but it wasn't until season 6 onward that there was a legitimate continuation of the story. In the meantime, Breaking Bad was always just kind of very thoroughly put together over the course of 5 seasons. So one episode would lead into another, one season would lead into another, and then, onward into the very finale. Dexter has never been one of those types of shows, so it seems a little bit crazy for me to speculate, or at least wish, that this expansion into a universe of content would be something that would lead into each other, that would feed each other and, kind of rhyme off of each other. But one can dream. Anyway, with that being said, I want to throw this over to the retrospective part of this. I hope you have enjoyed what you've seen so far. And quite frankly, if you want to continue to listen to this because you're just wanting Dexter content, hope you enjoy the rest of this. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe. Again, quite frankly, one of my favorite series of all time. Read all the books, watched all the shows. multiple times. So if you want to talk to me in the comment section below, I'm all here for it. Hope you're having a good day.
Tonight's the night. And it's going to happen again and again. Has to happen.
What's up, guys? Today we're back with another Real Talk podcast. I do not do as many of these as I really should because they're really fun, just generally long, very relaxed discussions on the biggest topic of the day. So with that being said, the biggest topic of the day, in fact, the biggest topic of the week, is that we are getting a revival of Dexter. Wow. This is something that I thought was coming, because there's speculation, pretty much Showtime's biggest show that they've ever have. It was the thing that really put them on the map. And with COVID bringing everything down these days, you were kind of in a position where you need a surefire hit next year that will get people's eyeballs back on your channel. And really, I feel like everything just lined up for this to happen. And now we have a chance to get what a lot of people consider one of the worst endings in any television show ever, especially one that was as popular as Dexter. We have a chance to right that ship and get it back on track. So that's what we're going to be discussing today, the Dexter series, our relationship with it, and our expectations and thoughts on season 9. So joining me in this discussion is someone who's never been on the channel before, but I hope she makes a great impression. Please welcome Charlotte from Charlotte's Web of Lies. You can go down to the description section below, hit that link, and go see her channel. Makes a lot of great AMV videos for you guys to check out. So Charlotte, how are you? How are you doing? And let's just jump right into this.
Hey, I'm doing pretty good, Mark. Really excited to talk about Dexter, one of my favorite shows from back in the day.
Really? Isn't that crazy? It's just been so long since this show was done, let alone since it really began. I mean, it ran for 8 seasons, was out of our airwaves in, 2013? It's been 7 years since then, 2013, so it started in 2006? That might be
something
wrong.
Like that, yeah.
So, okay, just jumping right off on here. When was the first time you saw Dexter? What really got you involved with it, and how did that relationship with the series progress throughout, not only the TV show, but outward into the online fandom or anything else like that?
Right, so I think I first heard about Dexter through a Vlogbrothers video or something. It was just some very tertiary mention of it, and I was like, all right, serial killer show, yeah, whatever. Honestly, I didn't really start watching the show until maybe season 6 or so. And then, but I didn't start with season 6. I started from season 1 because whenever I start something, I always want to go back to the source and just watch it in order. So I went back to season 1. I watched it every single episode. I would just marathon it. And then when season 7 and 8 were airing, I watched it as I went. And I had a friend who I worked with, and he also watched the show, and we used to talk about it all the time. And I read each of the books, or I think I read each of the books. I might have missed 1 or 2. I don't remember which ones, but I've read most of the books, and I've just been a huge fan of Dexter, but I haven't really had a good chance to talk about it in so long because it's been out of relevance for so long.
We were talking right before we started recording, and I told you it's just water cooler playground talk type of conversation because it hasn't been here for so long. No one really cares, but now that it's coming back, I'm sure a lot of people are going to have a lot to say and a lot of speculation on what they want for this new season, and real thoughts and speculations about whether or not it's just going to end there or if it's going to be such a big hit that they want to continue it in some way down the line. But kind of, our stories are a little bit different here because I think one of the reasons I have stayed with this show for as long as I have is because back in the day, I hadn't really watched it. Sure, I had heard about it because at the time I was really into, by the time this movie came out, the Saw franchise was kind of on its 3rd or 4th film at the time. And that's when, in that franchise, even though I'd kind of stayed with it for the longest time, I was really into it. You know, this series was getting so deep in its own mythology at that point that it was really only for the super fans, and it felt really worthwhile to be a part of that at the time. Not just watching the movies in general, but also on fan forums like House of Jigsaw. And kind of in that same headspace, there was this show called Dexter that was surrounded by a serial killer. It wasn't your normal police procedural. You're not following just a cop. You're following the guy who kills everyone. And even though you shouldn't feel good for him, he's your protagonist and he's the one you root for. So I knew it was out there, but it's not something that I wanted to watch until I think around season 5 came out. And right before that season came out, when I was watching it week to week, I told my dad, I was like, hey, you know, at this point was like, I'm about to go off to college and stuff. I was like, hey, I'm going to rent this from Blockbuster, because that's how long ago this show was.
Jesus.
I'm going to rent the first season. You can watch it with me. You don't have to, but I'm going to get into it and see if it's good. And we binged aggressively, like those first couple of seasons, 1, 2, 3, and 4. And it was hard to find, too, because it was so popular. I had to go to one, I think for season 3, maybe 3 or 4 different Blockbusters in my community at the time, just to find season 3, to watch it that night. And there was so much enthusiasm for this show, and it was so fun to watch it. So kind of that experience with my dad was one of the reasons why I think I've become such an apologist for everything that happened after season 4. Or I guess for some people after season 6, or maybe even just season 8. And then I guess when I got into college, the show had just wrapped up. I hadn't really ever gotten into the books, but I was kind of craving it. So I started reading the books, and 8 books later, I was still kind of engrossed in the series. And that's only made me love it just a little bit more. But like you said, there's nothing really, or hasn't really been anything to talk about other than just kind of picking up various little pieces from the show that people have already discussed to death. So we are in a pretty good situation now where we can just discuss the entire series as it were. So let's do that.
All right, sounds good.
To stay on that path, I need to work harder, explore new rituals, evolve.
Okay, so this is probably the biggest question when it comes to Dexter fans. When do you think the show really started? Like, obviously, the first couple of seasons are fairly strong. I think there's a pretty big consensus that at a certain point, the quality starts to drop, and it loses a lot of what it once was before it gets to a very, for most people, the vast majority, I would say, a depressingly bad ending. When do you think that pendulum started to shift and the quality started to drop tremendously? Or not tremendously, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I got you. So I mean, obviously season 3 there was like a little dip, but it was still for mostly good. Most of the good things about the show were still there. Honestly, a lot of people say it dropped at season 4. I still liked season 5 and 6 a lot. I liked season 5 because it was still dealing with the emotional fallout of season 4. There was all this grief over Rita's death, and Dexter was dealing with like what he was going to do with his 3 kids. And I'm not really happy about what happened with Aster and Cody, but it was interesting at the time. And season 6 I still liked. I don't really have I'm not like a huge fan of it or anything, but I thought it was good. I didn't feel like things were dropping. It was about season 7, and I think it was honestly mostly just because of Hannah McKay, who I'm not the hugest fan of as a character. Mm-hmm. I just feel like she sort of took away from the character development that Dexter was having and made it just kind of weird, where the show was almost like meandering, or like, oh, how can we make like the serial killer not seem like that bad? I don't know. It just.
How do we take this one character that you've been empathizing with for several years now and make him more empathetic?
Yeah, it's like I already liked Dexter. It was fine. Like the moral gray areas were interesting, and I feel like Hannah McKay just sort of tried to make it more black and white without sacrificing the premise, but it just didn't really work to me.
That's fair. I would actually say I like Hannah's character, not with the way she was introduced. I agree with you from the moment she was introduced and the way that they were trying to build her character throughout the vast majority of season 7. Mm-hmm. I was like, it's just, it's so reductive of the entire show, trying to push a love interest down our throats when we really don't need one. Because the entire premise of Dexter, and this is a point to its ending, I guess we'll get there eventually, but the whole point is can this monster learn to be a human being?
Yeah.
And finding love is a big part of that. It's one of the reasons Rita is so important in the first couple of seasons. It's one of the reasons the books have so much ground over the show, especially as it gets a little bit long in the tooth and you get 4, 5, 6, 7 entries into it. Rita plays so much more such a more important role in the books, even though I would arguably she's a smaller character in the books.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
Just because she is that human-esque portion of Dexter. But once they got rid of her, there was, you would kind of cut that from its sails. You kind of allowed that ship to sail, and you had to focus on another way of making him human. And they never really picked that up again. I mean, they tried with Lumen, they tried with Hannah, and none of those really felt genuine. The only moment Hannah felt genuine to me, I guess 2 moments throughout the entire series, 2 of my favorite moments, really, for good and bad, is the dream sequence where he sees himself older and Harrison is older and Hannah's older. I really like that. I feel like that would have made a decent ending of the show, even though it probably wouldn't have made a lot of people happy or been truthful to the entire narrative that had built up to that point. And that moment in season 8 where everybody is sitting down to have dinner, the whole serial killer family. I love that scene because it's just so corny, so unexpected.
Yeah.
And obviously I hate that scene. I love that scene. I also hate that scene because of just what a mess season 8 is, and we'll get there. But I don't know, those 2 scenes kind of redeemed her for me. I like the fact that she isn't on his table at the end. I like the fact that she's still out there, and she's probably a character I'd like to see again because I feel like she has potential. But her introduction for me is also like that. It's just ham-fisted in a way,
Right, yeah. I actually, despite not being a huge fan of her character, I will say I do think that it would be very good to bring her back because I think that her concept still has potential. And, if we're trying to give a more a higher quality ending to Dexter's character arc, I think that Hannah and, Harrison, who would be with her, play an important role in that. And I don't want them to pretend like it never existed, Yeah,
that's probably why we'll get there. I do want to know exactly everyone that you want to come back, but that's a great reason why I feel like she needs to come back. Plus, like you said, she's the only person that we know of right now who has Harrison, and there has to be one character. If there's one character that definitely needs to come back, it has to be Harrison because he's kind of still out there.
Yeah.
The only thing I do disagree with is season 5 was okay to me. I think the limitations of television is one of the reasons I don't like it as much. I love the idea of a monster, someone with a dark passenger, and himself is a self-help guru. It's so great. I love it. It's something that, I already spoke a little bit about the Saul franchise. Saul franchise did that too with Bobby Dagen, and it has kind of the same problems. Budgetary reasons make it less impactful than it really should be. And kind of in the same vein, the only way I think that works is if it's huge. This guy is not only a self-help guru, but he's just the biggest self-promotional asshole that you can think of, right? He takes advantage of everything. He's making these gigantic displays and huge lecture halls and all this other stuff, packed house, making a real big show of it, and just an egomaniac. And we got that in season 5, but it's so small and they never really focus on it, and it takes so long to get there that by the time that this is coming to a head, you're already about 10 episodes into a 13-episode season, and that none of it's really going to pay off in any real meaningful way, and Dexter and Lumen are going to, win at the end.
I'll say this: they did it so low key that I actually forgot that that was a part of season 5 until you mentioned it just now. If I'm being honest, like the things that I remember about season 5 are like just like the barrels and Lumen as a character, who I thought was a slightly better take on the sort of Hannah premise, but I guess we'll get to that.
No, yeah, and that's the thing about Lumen too. I mean, what are your thoughts on Lumen? I know a lot of people love her in the fandom. I've seen a lot of people gravitate towards her character, but I kind of like the fact that she has this dark passenger in her because of everything that she went through, but she kind of gets over it. Like, it's a vengeance story pretty much all of season 5, and her getting over this is helping Dexter get over Rita. It's a fairly well structured season. There's just a lot of weird things about it that don't really add up to something that as good as it really should be. Part of that probably has something to do with Michael C. Hall having cancer during the filming of that season, which, I mean, he's a beast that he went through chemo and everything during it.
Yeah, he's still going strong after all this time. But Lumen, I think I'm definitely on the board of big fan of her character. I don't know that I agree with the way it ended, with her basically being like entirely over it, and it seems like they're trying to imply that she'll be perfectly healthy and sane after this experience, which I don't think is very realistic. But overall, I do think that it was a good revenge story. It tied in well to Dexter's grief arc over Rita. It was good.
But on that note, I guess let's go back a little bit, because we kind of skipped over the first 4 seasons. Which any thoughts on this? And kind of, because you've read the books, share your thoughts on this as well, because I'm certain most people who are listening to this right now haven't, and I think that there's a lot to say about how the books are different and how they treat various characters differently. And this goes for the litany of characters: Dokes, Cody, Aster, Rita.
The Dark Passenger.
The Dark Passenger is a character in the books himself. Debra is completely different.
Yeah.
In the first 4 seasons, I agree with you wholeheartedly that the Miguel season 3, falls apart because I understand what they're trying to go with, where he's trying to make a friend, and he's trying to share himself with someone else who can see him fully, but he's lying to Miguel about everything along the way just to try to feel him out, and that kind of comes to bite him. All the while, you have the guy who skins everybody alive in the background of that season, and it gets a little bit overbloated with the wedding and everything they're trying to do. Rita's pregnant. I wonder, like, I also feel like that falls off, but I think part of that is because the first 2 seasons are so good. The first season with the Brian reveal is great. It's hard hitting. It's not something you really expect at the time, and then going directly into, oh my gosh, they're investigating Dexter in the next season, didn't really leave the 3rd season anywhere to go. What are your thoughts on that?
I think I generally agree, although I think even if you take it like just on its own as a season, I think it's still just of a slightly lesser quality. It's not entirely up to just the contrast. The Miguel, we didn't know Miguel before, and he doesn't have like a history with Dexter or anyone really. So it just lacks that connection that the things that happened in the other seasons had. Were like season 1, it's his, I was about to say adopted brother, but no, his biological brother. And season 2, it's it's Dokes. So I mean, there's that, and then it's Dexter, who's the like serial killer that's getting investigated. So like obviously that's like very tightly woven into the characters that we already care about, because it is the main character, and everything about him getting investigated. And Miguel, they had to like build him from scratch, and they did a no right job. I thought that he was fine. I like the scene on the ceiling, or on the rooftop, but yeah, I just don't think that they did quite as good of a job building a character and a relationship in just the 1 season. And I think that might have been part of why they kept Trinity a little bit more distant from Dexter in season 4.
I agree. Actually, I do, because Trinity is such an enigma, but Trinity's entire character, his persona, what he was supposed to teach Dexter throughout the entire season is so much more connected to everything Dexter has to learn or that he's going through in all the other scenes. The having a family, trying to raise and be himself and trying to juggle all this, and then Trinity comes along, and this is probably why a lot of people love it so much, is it's so expertly tied, where this guy comes in, he's brutal, everybody knows that, but he seems to have it all together until he really doesn't, and it really starts to boil over throughout the entire show until you get to that amazing scene where he goes into the police station and he's like, "Nice to meet you, Dexter Morgan." And it's like, oh my god, like, what's gonna happen next? Like, that stuff, that's the type of stuff that Dexter, I think, is known for. Keeps you on the edge of your seat and really pushes that excitement to great degrees, especially when you're following someone that you know you really shouldn't be rooting for in the back of your mind. And I would say with Miguel and the first 2 seasons, like you were talking about, just to kind of summarize that a little bit more, the more I've rewatched the show, I think I've rewatched it 3 times now. Mm-hmm. I feel like Dexter suffers a lot, not only in its final seasons, but in the first couple of seasons on rewatches to where we are in television today. Because Dexter feels like it was at this really weird interim period between episodic television still being a huge staple on television and weekly serialized storytelling, multiple season-long stories, just getting a foot on the ground. I mean, back in the day, it was, the thing that proved to everyone that this is possible was back when The Sopranos was coming on, when they realized that people wouldn't wait just for syndication and they wanted to watch an entire season, they would buy it on DVD, and the DVD Blu-ray industry blew up. I mean, before pirating and streaming really became a huge thing, Dexter came on in that vein and told season-long stories. But with the first season, the second season, the third season, and I guess theoretically up until even the 4th season, even though there's progression happening every single season and you know that these characters are growing, you're telling a story through episode 1 through 13 every single time, it does a lot to reset itself.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Sort of prestige TV, growing pains sort of era.
Exactly. And that's what it is kind of hard to watch. I just recently, me and my girlfriend, we watched season 1. She'd never seen it before. She knows I love it to death, and she watched all of season 1 in the first go around, and she wasn't overly impressed. And I got that feeling watching it was, the way that season ends is he kills Brian, and everyone's celebrating in his mind about like what he does and everything, and it feels like this is what you would expect from early prestige television, where it could just end right there. Like, the story's done. There's nowhere really to go with it besides the lingering idea of, will Debra find out like what's going to happen? And obviously that's something that builds throughout the entire show. But going back and rewatching it now, it's like it doesn't compare in the same way that certain new shows, even a little bit older shows that came out near the same time, like Game of Thrones or Breaking Bad or any of those other shows, played out. You know what I mean?
Yeah. There were seasonal arcs in Breaking Bad to some extent, but they usually flowed in between, and there were characters that like the villains would like flow over and like past season 1. We're still dealing with Tuco in season 2, and so on.
And that's really that's such an interesting situation, talking about the evolution of television and how it's changed so drastically so quickly. A lot of people don't remember this, but Breaking Bad and Dexter ended a week apart from each other.
Oh yeah, I remember those conversations of people comparing the 2 finales and being like, Dexter fans, you see, it was trash the whole time.
Yeah, then Breaking Bad comes in and just kills it, and has continued to kill it, and pretty much every single way that it's decided to continue its universe, with Better Call Saul and El Camino, which we haven't really talked a whole lot about on this channel other than one of these Real Talks. But anyway,
I mean, if you want to talk about Breaking Bad sometime with me, I can go on that one for a long time as well.
Oh yes, I would absolutely love to talk about Better Call Saul before season 6 comes out. Truly, on a side note here, just because this isn't, we're just on topic, that is I think I like Better Call Saul better than Breaking Bad at this point.
Spicy. I don't know that I agree. I haven't rewatched Breaking Bad recently enough, but that is a spicy take.
That is a spicy take, right? I just think it's so methodical, and you can't do better than just upending all expectations of that show and just being like, we're not going to tell you or show you a show with Saul Goodman. It's going to be Jimmy McGill, and I love that. I love seeing the progression and knowing it's a completely different thing. And if we go back and discuss it in any real way, then we can get into that here. Now we're talking about Dexter. Sorry for anyone who's listening, but
I will say on the topic we were talking about, which is sort of the breaking up of seasonal arcs, I think that's actually interesting, because whether or not you agree with the execution, I think that might have been part of why the serial killer the per season serial killer was de-emphasized a little bit in the last few seasons of Dexter, because the Russian guy from season 7, I think it was, that wasn't even like the finale kill,
which sucks, because I loved his introduction and the way that they played him up. But yeah, I agree with you. They do get a little bit. It does get a little bit ham-fisted with what they wanted to do as the seasons went on. Getting through those first 5 seasons, you get into season 6, which you said you didn't love to the extent of some of the original seasons, but you appreciated it. And I have to disagree, and I really want to know why you think it's a good show or a good season. I just think it's the worst. And I know a lot of people think that season 8 is the worst or season 7's the worst for one reason or another. I hate season 6 because one, and I could be wrong on this, so correct me if I'm wrong, because it has been a bit of time since I've gotten back to rewatch it because it's so terrible. But they do a couple things that are great, but for only one episode, or just really weird ham-fisted things. Or really weird, terrible decisions, in my opinion. One, you bring back Brian. Awesome episode. One of the best in the entire season, one of the best in the entire show, where he decides, screw Harry's code, like, I'm going to go off and do my own thing, and Brian comes back to talk to him as the Dark Passenger. That's something that should have been a give and take throughout the entire show. It's only in one episode, and I have no idea why. I love that episode. 2, the twist. Dexter's not something that needs a twist. And thinking that they went through such great length to do it really detracts from the rest of the season. Like, it goes from 0 to 100 really quickly after that, and it kind of minimizes everything that happened throughout the rest of that season. 3, one of the last episodes, probably the last episode of the season, like I said, it's been a while, but there's one part where he goes to like Harrison's play or something, or one of the kids' play or something, wearing his kill suit. Like, not I was interrupted and I had to go from a kill and somebody's in, or at least this is my memory, but like, I'm just going to this place in my kill suit, and it's like, what is going on? Like, what is going through his mind? I guess he's distracted or something. It's just really weird to me. I could be misremembering all of this, so tell me in the comment section below if I am. But all of that kind of combines into a very meh experience for me.
All right, so the kill suit thing, I'm not going to apologize for that. It's a very silly season. It's kind of a silly series, all things considered. I'm not going to apologize for that. You got me. But for the twist, honestly, okay, so the fact that there was a twist didn't really like faze me that much, but like when I looked back on it afterwards, I sort of appreciated the mirror image that it had to Dexter, where there was this other serial killer and he's like getting into serial killing. Like, it's getting worse over time with his Dark Passenger, who's personified in the same way that Dexter's is at this point in the series. And I don't know, I thought it was a good mirror image, because like we see Dexter making like greater steps towards stopping serial killing in season 6 with the mechanic Sam, I think his name was. I don't remember all of it, but I thought that was like an interesting sort of mirror, and the ways that we see like Dexter could have maybe made some sort of recovery without ever having to go through the like 12-step program with Deb that we saw in season 7 or whatever. Mm-hmm. But I thought that was interesting. What was the first thing you said you didn't like about it?
Oh, I didn't. It was no first thing. I loved the bringing back Brian.
Oh, right. Okay. Yeah. So I was just going to say I agree with that then, I guess. But I will say another thing that I really liked about this was the finale, like the very last scene where Dexter is. Well, first of all, I love that kill. The kills, like the finale kills for the first 6-ish seasons, because it doesn't really happen in season 7 or 8 as much. I think are like some of the best scenes in every season. Just sort of like a way of summarizing the themes of the season and where Dexter's character is at the time, because the things that he says to the people on his table, in a lot of ways, he's actually saying them to himself. And so when he says, God isn't here, I'm in charge, that's sort of a way of him trying, not just saying to, God, I don't even remember the main killer's name, but, he's not only saying it to him, he's also trying to reassure himself, because he's had this sort of tumultuous character arc throughout season 6 where he's getting better, he's getting worse, and so he's trying to reassert control, especially after everything that happened with Harrison, where he almost lost his son. I thought that was really interesting. And even though I'm not a huge fan of how it turned out in season 7 and 8, I thought the idea of Deb finally discovering that Dexter was a serial killer, has had this other side to himself their whole lives. I thought that was really interesting. And honestly, even for season 7, it started out in a way that I liked, but it kind of went off the rails eventually. I don't hold that in season 6 itself, though.
No, I get that. And I feel the exact same way. When season 7 started, I was like, oh man, like the last 2 seasons I think were dull for one reason or another, but it's picking up. And then it also fell off the rails. And season 8 just has absolutely zero direction to itself. And that's my biggest problem with it. I told you before we started recording, one of the things that pisses me off more about Dexter and the way it progressed was the blatant lies that they said before. Because I believe, and I could be wrong, it was after season 5 or after season 6. Now that I think about it, it might be after season 6, but Michael C. Hall wanted a pay raise. They were wondering like how long the show was going to last and all this other stuff. So they gave him a pretty dramatic pay raise, and they greenlit it for a couple more seasons. And they came out and said, "We have an idea. We have the time. This is how we'd like to structure it. We have an ending in mind." And talk about prestige television and the golden age of television, its creation. That is pretty much all you can ask for when it comes to television these days, is that it will end, and it will end on the creative's term. So that was really exciting. I thought that for sure they must have an idea of where to go with this. And once you get into those last couple seasons of the show, and I'm kind of including season 6 in this, you get to a point where you're like, okay, like, what was that end game in mind, and how were you going to get there in any economical way, especially through season 8, which seemingly transitions its main focus multiple times. You got only the reintroduction to Hannah, you got kind of delving more into Dexter's past and where he was, this new killer who does brain surgery or whatever. You have this guy that Dexter wants to shepherd. You have Debra going through this chaotic entire season where she's dealing with her demons and everything, responding to the previous couple seasons, which is something I actually want to ask you about. So I'll have you start with that. But there's just so much going on there until it gets to an end point that doesn't really reflect. I guess in a certain way it does, but it doesn't really reflect where you think it's going and how a lot of people thought it should end.
If I love you, I went to the church that night that you killed Travis Marshall to tell you that I'm in love with you.
Before you get into the last couple of seasons and its direction, especially in seasons 7 and 8, the big elephant in the room here that I need you to answer is Debra's feelings for Dexter. In your opinion,
oh my god!
In your opinion, does it work? I mean, not like, I mean, obviously the cringe factor of it is there, but was it justified? Was that the best way to play it? And I gotta admit, I am a little bit torn on this. Like, I can see how it works, and I understand why it's really terrible.
All right, so in my opinion, I think that there were parts of it that they played well and parts of it that they did not. Because the part that I liked about it mostly was, I think this was season 7 after she confronted Dexter with all his blood slides and all that. And she was like, "Are you a serial killer?" And then she breaks down and she says, like, when I showed up to that altar, I was going to tell you that I loved you.
I'm in love with you. It's like, not that I love you. It's like, I'm in love with you. Like, I
thought that part was like good because like Dexter's reaction was very uncomfortable. It was clear that like he didn't think this was appropriate and that he didn't think of he didn't think of Deb as anything other than a sister. I thought that was good because that's probably how that would actually play out in real life. Like if you've been brother and sister your whole lives, whether or not there's a blood relation, you tend to think of them as your brother or your sister.
Yes.
The things I didn't like about it were basically everything else. I didn't like the premise really, like on its face, and I didn't like that there was like the scenes with like the psychiatrist that she was seeing, who was like, "Oh yeah, no, you should totally go like confess to Dexter. This is a healthy thing for you to do, and there's nothing else to talk about. You should confess to Dexter." At
the time that she said that, I was like, okay. The one thing I was really hoping for was the psychiatrist, and it would have been this would have made a lot more sense. Talk about like retroactively changing things, right? But if that psychiatrist was the one from season 8
that actually would have been big brain. That would have been so good,
because then it's like she's playing, like, because then you play it up where it's like, how much does she know, and like how much is she playing with, like playing the cards, right? Like just throwing everything at Dexter and seeing how he reacts. Like, that's the only thing that would have made it better, like more interesting and played up. But I agree with you. There's 2 things I really like about it, and the rest is just cringy, god-awful nonsense. One of the first things that you said in the pilot, I'll say 3. In the pilot, when he's going around on the boat and all this other stuff and reintroducing us to the world of Dexter, his mindset, he says in his monologue, like off-screen voiceover, whatever that he does throughout the show, he's like, if there's anyone, if I loved anyone, it would be Debra.
I think the exact quote was, "If I had feelings for," which sounds even more like,
yeah, like like the thing is that's like, I think that plays into what you were saying about his reaction to it. Is like, he knows, even for Dexter, he knows like that's wrong, but I think at a certain level he knows where she's coming from. Because the other thing I really like about it is how that realization in her plays into how they deal with the revelation that he is a serial killer, with Harry, which is just basically Dexter talking to himself, saying like, this is the only reason, like this might be the only reason that she doesn't turn you in or shoot you or something, like whatever, right? And it's like, okay, I see where you're going with this. That's what really makes a lot of sense here, and playing through that. But it just becomes such a big deal that it kind of, like, it's awkward enough, but it plays out for too long where it just swallows up any real quality or interesting perspective that has. Because the creepiness kind of, the creepiness overtakes the rest of it. And I would say the third thing in that is Michael C. Hall and Jennifer Carpenter were actually married in real life for the first couple seasons. And I don't care what anyone says. It's something that I thought was weird throughout the first couple seasons when I watched it, was there's a lot of sexual tension between them in the first couple seasons. Like, on-screen chemistry is great, but it comes across like, what is going on here? And I don't know if this was just a stupid idea from someone, or somebody was like who also saw that and was trying to pay it off. But at that point they had divorced, and I don't know that it was like, they're working together, so I don't know exactly how professional versus like feeling wise. It seems like a real bad taste when you think of it. So those are the only 3 things that make sense about it to me. I thought it was a great way to play up her not, throwing cuffs on him and taking him into jail. It's played too long, and like I said, just a little tweak here and there You could have made it so much better. And that's the thing that goes back to what I was saying earlier, is you didn't have a plan. If you had a plan, somebody might have been like, there's a psychiatrist, here's a psychiatrist. You just link them together and make her a lot more sinister in the last season. What does she know? Why did she do all this shit? Blah, blah, blah. Like, and then you could go back too and be like, in season 8, you can go back when you're exploring her and be like, Debra didn't really love her. Like, she was manipulating her the whole time so she could play around with Dexter and all this other stuff. Like, that's the big brain energy that you could have played into this, but it's really up there. So okay, I just felt like, because I think that's the smoking gun for a lot of people, where it's like, what the actual fuck is happening with this show?
Are you a serial killer?
Yes.
Jump into the last 2 seasons, if you will, like thoughts on them, ideas of especially the last season. Like, what are something that you wish they would have explored more or less, or how they would have even ended the show if you had your way?
All right, so I think the first thing that I wish had been like emphasized more is Debra's character arc throughout the last couple seasons, because I actually think it's pretty good overall, because we see her like go through sort of the phases of grief where she's like in denial that Dexter's actually a serial killer at first, and then she's angry and depressed. And I think it culminates in a surprisingly good season finale in season 7. That might be a very hot take, but I thought it was good seeing her like sacrifice everything to save Dexter, because he's been sort of the one constant in her life. And I think if they didn't have to spend so much time on all these new characters and these new serial killer family, and still keeping Dexter as like the main character, I think we could have seen more attention given to that, and it would have I think it would have played a little bit better, because we wouldn't have had to worry as much about like Dexter's character going kind of off the rails. And for the ending, I think was it the original showrunner who said, or was it the author who said if they had worked on the show?
Clyde Phillips, the original showrunner, and also the one coming back. I think I know what you're thinking about, so he's the one who gave his perspective on how he would have ended it.
Right, where he said that it would have been the Dexter on the electric chair or on the injection table. I forgot, he's on death row, and then right before he dies, he sees all the victims throughout the seasons that we've had, and he just sees all of them looking at him and judging him right before it cuts to black. Mm-hmm. And I think that would have been a very strong ending. Obviously, I didn't come up with that, but Clyde Phillips did. But I think that would have been a really good ending. I think that in general, Dexter should have either died or gone to prison, and Harrison maybe could have ended up in a more stable situation than a different serial killer. Because that also just really doesn't sit right with me. I also don't really like that Aster and Cody just kind of got written out forever. But something about Harrison, if we're trying to empathize with Dexter, and we think that he cares about his family, and that's one of the very few things that he cares about, then it just doesn't really sit right with me that he would leave Harrison in the care of a different serial killer. In the exact because this thing is oh, I don't know if I can raise Harrison because I'm a serial killer, and so I don't know if this is a good environment. But then he just does a different serial killer. So it's the exact same situation.
I think at the time when Clyde Phillips talked about his idea for the ending, I was floored by it. I was very impressed by the imagining that scene. I mean, granted, the way that you got there would have to be completely different, and that's...
Yeah, you couldn't just slot that into the season 8 last episode. But, if we had followed a different trajectory and ended there, that would have been great.
No, of course. And to me, that's one of the better things. As I already said, I thought, I've seen some fan edits who use that scene with Hannah and Dexter older, but still going about their business and doing everything that they do, as a legitimate ending. And it's we've been through so much at this point. I can imagine that being a much better ending than what we got. Harrison's all grown up, they're still loving each other, all this other stuff. Obviously that doesn't really work. And Clyde Phillips, I think the longer you've gotten past that, it's not something, and I really hope, I don't think he's this stupid, because the first 4 seasons are fairly well put together. I don't think that you're that stupid to be like, hey, I'm just going to do that idea for this 10 episode revival arc. Like, I'm going to work my way to that ending. It's like, no, we're past that. Like, it's been way too long at this point to go back to that well and just use that ending that people have been talking about for years, right? You have to do something different. For the ending itself, I love it and I hate it. The more I've sat with it, the more I've become an apologist for this entire series, and a lot of people might think that that's awful. Like, oh, just share your real opinion on it. Well, yeah, but like I feel like people give it too much grief, and it kind of it almost insists upon protection because of the overwhelming dislike that it gets.
The one thing I'll say about the finale, like I generally didn't like it, but the things that I disliked about it almost seem to overlap none at all with the things that other people dislike about it. Because like I think the lumberjack thing is fine. Like if the ending is going to be he goes into a self-imposed quarantine away from society basically, then yeah, like being a lumberjack, like out in the countryside, like that's a fine enough way to do it.
Giving up on his entire humanity, just him going to work, coming back. He's not doing what he loves anymore, but he just goes back and he just sits down and powers off. Like,
yeah,
that.
Like that was good.
I agree with that. I agree that that's a cool thing. There's 2 other things about that ending that I think a lot of people don't like is the death of Debra.
Now that I do hate. I hate that a lot because I don't think it gels well with the rest of her character arc throughout season 6 and 7 or 8 and 8.
Agreed. I definitely agreed that is something that's worth mentioning. The one thing I did remember on my last rewatch that I loved but also hate is, like you said, it doesn't gel with her character from the last couple of seasons. And the problem is you get so far away from where this show was at the very beginning that it almost doesn't matter as much because the characters have evolved, right? Mm-hmm. But in the first season and the 3rd season, there's 2 scenes that really stuck out to me, having known everything on my most recent rewatch. Was one, in the first season, there's a lot of references to the storms coming. Like there's a lot of hurricane references, and I thought that that's really interesting. My point is, it doesn't really matter at that point. We were so far away from the first season that probably nobody remembers that. And
I certainly didn't.
and then in the 3rd season, he's sitting in his office with Debra, and she specifically tells him not to let her live on a machine. Like, if that's the case, just just take me out. Blah blah blah. I don't want to live in that way. And it's him specifically at the very end of the show doing as she wished. And that's nice. But again, you're in season 3 all the way to season 8. All this other stuff has happened in between. No one's going to remember that conversation because it doesn't really mean anything. So that, to me, is part of the problem. I don't particularly mind the fact that they killed off Debra. It was just the way that they got there. And that's my biggest problem with season 8 is it's just so all over the place, scatterbrained, all these different ideas. I mean, you start off with a character that we've never met who's important to the entire backstory of the character that you followed for the last 7 seasons. You introduce a new serial killer that could have easily, if they had done anything with the books, it could have easily just been Astrid. Like, because in the books, Astrid, for people who don't know, and this is another thing I really want to get into. This is going to be a long video, I'm sorry. But in the books, Astrid and Cody are serial killers. They have dark passengers because of what their dad did to them. And he tries to, he has this idea that I'm going to treat them like Harry treated me, and I'm going to teach them the way. And you get a lot of really interesting story from that. Dexter, season 8, just decides to introduce someone completely new to the equation, and it's like, what is going on? And then you have the serial killer family. Hannah comes back in a major way in that season because they need Dexter to have one last push to to humanity before he decides to fling everything off because of the events of that season and pretty much that season alone, even though it's a culmination of everything that happens in the entire show. And then it starts off really, really obnoxious is because, like you said, Debra's decision at the end of season 7 is pretty good, especially how that mirrors the end of the first book with LaGuerta dying in the container, which is what happens in the first book. And then Dokes becomes like the antagonist in the book series for the entire series, even though he's pretty much reduced to stumps.
Yeah.
Then once you get into season 8, though, they've thrown all that away. Like, she quits the Force and she's going off to do her own thing with somebody that we've never met before, with Bobby Dagen, and that's really obnoxious. Sean Patrick Flannery, who's also in Saw 7, so bringing back that. And there's too much regression. So what I would say is, if I were to fix this, if I could fix this, or what they should have done, is at the very end of season 6, the only way I think it would have been better, I think you already alluded to this as well, is right after Debra figures out or sees her brother do that, you begin season 7 with a play out of everything that we saw in season 6, and you make it clear before the intro comes on that you're officially switching perspectives from Dexter to Debra. And the last 2 seasons are from Debra's perspective, and Dexter becomes like a side character. He's the main side character in the show, but you're following Debra and her realization and dealing with this news.
Yeah, I agree that would have been a good way to do it. Debra was just like the more consistent character all the way up to the end, where the end happened.
Yeah, I really do think that would have, just because having her as the main focus, you get so far into Dexter. And I know the whole story is like, can Pinocchio be a real boy? Like, that's really the whole point. But after 6 seasons, you kind of have your answer. That, he's tried to have a family, he's tried to find God, he's tried to find friendship, he's tried to find his biological family. None of this is working. It's all bridges are being burned down against him. So the only family he has left now has to struggle with the fact that she knows who he is. Changing perspectives and having her be the main focus, and we're seeing her deal with it like we did in those seasons, would have been interesting in my opinion, and it would have given a fresh take for the end of the show that would still allow it to end the way it did, or even a completely different ending based on where that storytelling gets you.
I think it also would have been interesting to see Harry, like, sort of like conversations like with Harry, but like a very different Harry, like the Harry as Deb remembered him, and sort of see him like change throughout the season as she learned more about like the life that Dexter and Harry had that she never knew about.
That's actually, I never thought of that. That's really good, because you would still have to bring, that's great. You would still have to bring in the dark passenger thing, or the way the show interpreted it with Harry, and then you can do flashbacks like how the show started, or you can have Harry come in and play off that character as she remembered him. Also, you could change the voiceover, so it's Debra talking and not Dexter. That would have been interesting.
Speaking of the flashbacks, I hope that we don't have very many in season 9, because in all throughout the Dexter series, they would be flashing back to like them as like early 20s or teenagers or whatever, and they, if it was like young enough, they could get a different actor, but otherwise it'd be like Michael C. Hall and Jennifer Carpenter. I'm really bad with names. Are those? That's right.
Yeah, that's right.
In like a wig, and it just looks really bad.
Oh my gosh, but you gotta love that. Like the nurse, his first kill, the nurse is like, it's Michael C. Hall playing off a 20-year-old, and he's like this 30-something. It's so funny.
Yeah.
Or he's like a teenager at the time. I don't even know. It's really funny because he's just in this really bad wig.
Yeah.
But I guess,
like, if they do flashbacks, I want it to be in the space between seasons 8 and 9, not like before season 1.
True. I would actually agree with that.
I destroy everyone I love. I have to protect them from me.
We'll finally talk about season 9. I'm sure that's why a lot of people tuned in. So this is interesting news in my opinion, because even though I've been wanting and kind of cheerleading a continuation for the last couple of years now, and a handful of videos that I've done on it and talked about it a lot on my social media accounts, the question is, where do you go with it? Because they've already come out and said they're not throwing away any of the other seasons, right?
Right.
So I believe he's in Oregon as a lumberjack in his self-imposed prison. Angel, like Batista, he's off running his restaurant. I think he finally retired. Masuka, who cares?
Hey, now.
Deborah's dead, and Quinn is, I guess, eternally depressed, based off all of this stuff. So, like, it kind of begs the question, like, do you go back to Miami? Would that be reductive? Do you reintroduce all these characters, or is there just a handful of people that you truly need to show up? And I told you before we started recording that the only ones I can think of right now of established characters were Debra and Hannah. And as you already said earlier, obviously Harrison has to come back too. So, and I have my
and that was nice because you can use a different actor, so you don't even need to hunt that person down.
Yeah, of course, which is great always. But I guess the question is do you think that they need to come back? More people? Do they need to go back to Miami? Is that just going back to the well one too many times, or is that necessary to see where all these characters are?
I wouldn't mind a glimpse at where everyone is now, especially Quinn, because this was actually another one of the things people always talked about was like he was very suspicious of Dexter in season 3 and 4 and 5, I think. But then when he sees Dexter kill a dude on camera in season 8, he doesn't say anything about it. I think it'd be nice to bring him back and sort of see him like reflecting. Like he's been reflecting on it for 8 years. He's like, I think I actually was right for all that time.
There is that scene in season 8 where he does that, and they're watching it happen. I mean, granted, that is a kind of a fun kill where he's like, "I'm going to use that pin to kill you," and he stabs him in the arm, which makes no sense, but he takes it out and stabs him in the neck, and Angel sees it. But I've always taken that scene as kind of a glimpse that Quinn's looking at it differently, but I could be wrong.
How do you mean?
Like, kind of in that vein where I might have been right about this guy. Like, it's so, because everyone's like, "Oh, you were protecting yourself," and all this other stuff, but Quinn doesn't say crap.
Yeah, that's fair. I think it might have been in his mind of like, maybe I was right, but like this is justified in my mind morally, not legally, obviously, but so maybe he just didn't say anything at the moment. But I wouldn't mind a glimpse of the characters from the Miami police station. But going to Miami, I think, would be a big mistake because there's really no reason for Dexter to go to Miami. There's really no reason for the story to be taking place in Miami. Maybe like the last episode if they go to like Miami to like get tried in the district where all the murders happened or something. But generally, I think that a problem that a lot of sequels have and reboots have is where they try to stay true to like the brand, even if it doesn't fit the story. So like an example would be, you talk about Saw on this channel a lot. In Saw 7, I think it would have been better if there wasn't like this whole other game with like Bobby Dagen, because like who cares? We're trying to resolve the plot with Jill and Hoffman. Similarly, I think that like there's an idea of like the brand of like Dexter being in Miami, but that's not where the story is really at this point, I don't think.
I completely agree with that. And I feel like that's going to be the first major sinkhole that they're going to fall into when it coming back to this show. Because I feel like so many people think that Dexter needed to end a certain way, and when you have the creatives coming back and saying that this is our shot to make up for it, I don't know. For me, it doesn't sell a lot of confidence that they're going to take it in such a dramatically different direction that would justify bringing it back after all this time. As we've already talked about, there's the ending of the show deserves a lot of criticism, but probably not as much hate that it got. So you're in kind of between a rock and a hard place with going back to the iconography, the location that made this show great. I mean, the first episode of the series and then everything throughout, the entire identity of the books and Dexter as a character is tied to Miami, and how that plays into all this stuff and who he is as a character. And I feel like maybe the temptation to go back there might be too great, and we're gonna find ourselves there, not like you said, way too early at the beginning of the revival. Like he's just going back for some reason. I have to make amends for this or whatever, and then you're stuck there for way too long. There's just another serial killer, and that is the brand. And that kind of goes on to a next point is I don't think it should be a serial killer. Like, I would argue that it doesn't need to be like an ice truck killer or the Trinity killer or whatever. It's too on point. It's too similar to what we've gotten throughout the entire show. I would take a cue from the books and do a group. And I think the only one that you can do, because I think there's two groups in the entire show, or the books. I think there's two groups in the entire book series. There's the cannibals, and then there's the Dark Passenger cult. And for me, the cannibals make a lot more sense. And the cannibals make a lot more sense to do in Oregon, where I guess I would just pitch. I have an idea. It's not fleshed out yet, but generally, like, you have Dexter, you pick up with him being a lumberjack in Oregon for all these years, like almost a decade at this point. And you started off the first episode pretty much exactly like the beginning of the pilot episode, where he's driving somewhere and it's like, tonight's the night, blah, blah, blah. All of like, show all the things around the nightlife of Miami, all this other stuff, but it's Oregon and it's just a bunch of trees and nobody's out and there's nothing going on and it's like super dark out and all this other stuff. And it's driving. It's kind of the exact same scenery except for those comparisons, compare and contrasting. And there's no voiceover whatsoever. He's not talking to himself. He's not doing anything. And he goes to a local bar. And all these people that he works with are like sitting there. They're all having fun talking. And he's just sitting there at the bar with a drink that he's not touching. And he's just looking, like, focus at this like one guy who's like going about his business, having fun, being rowdy and drunk and all this other stuff. And the guy goes out of the bar, goes to take a piss in the alley or something, and Dexter gets up and he goes and he follows him and he's looking at him, and like something stops him where he gets up, he leaves the guy alone, and he goes back home and he gets blackout fucking drunk. Like, he has to drown out like all of these urges to do what he knows is right and like what he's called to do. And as the show goes on, you take pretty much the entire story of the fifth book, where he does end up following this guy. He kills him. This new club opens up in Oregon, new bar, whatever, and it's tied to like a cannibal ring and all this other stuff. And the only reason I say this, for the people who haven't read the books, is there is this jaw-dropping moment in the fifth book that I absolutely love, where they're building this cannibal concept. These two girls have gone missing. He gets into the like basement or something of this club, and he's trying to help this girl get out, and she tells him, "No, I want to be eaten." And I don't know, that stuck with me because it's so horrific that it's worth exploring, and I think the show at some point should try to adapt it. So it seems like a perfect opportunity to do that. And one of the things you could do at the very end of that show, the revival, is after you've dealt with the cannibal troop and all that other stuff going on, it becomes national news, and then you can end it with some kind of a tease where they realize that Dexter's still alive in Miami, in Miami they realize that Dexter's still alive elsewhere, or Quinn has an idea of it or something. So like, that would be my somewhat pitch for what this is, but honestly, I have no idea what.
Sounds like a good pitch to me. I mean, book 5 is a good book. But yeah, the other reason, I don't know if the audience knows why the Dark Passenger cult wouldn't really work, is because the Dark Passenger was like actually kind of a ghost sort of thing in the books, and it's just not really the same in the show, so it wouldn't really just work the same way.
Yeah, it's its own character. It's like a spirit that infects the host, that goes from one person to another. So like in the book, it's if I have a Dark Passenger and you have a Dark Passenger, I kill you, and the Dark Passenger goes into another person and breeds and goes outward and affects all these different people. It's really weird. Like, I don't know if that's the cult book or just spattered throughout the entire series, but there are chapters where you're hearing from nothing but the Dark Passenger, and that's really interesting.
Yeah, like I think they started hinting at it in the first book, even, where there was like, italicized text that was like clearly the Dark Passenger, but you could like hand wave that away as like just like his thoughts to himself or whatever until a little bit later on.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Do you have any ideas?
Okay. What's that?
Do you have any ideas? I mean, I kind of went off on a little rant there about like what I would like to see, but just in general, like any pitches, anything that you would really like to see from this season?
So my pitch isn't really quite as detailed as yours, but I think that one desire that I have, and I doubt I'll get it, is I want the season to be pretty conclusive. Um, if they're fishing for like another like 2 or 3 seasons, then I guess that's that. But I would like to see just one final season. It's self-contained. It is telling the story of Dexter either coping with his new life and the pitfalls therein, or him finally having to answer for his crimes. And that ranges from the serial killings to abandoning Harrison, to even sort of abandoning Cody and Aster. Just like all his failures, I want it to sort of culminate in that. And it doesn't have to end the same way as the pitch where he's on death row and he sees all his victims. But I would like to see sort of like the end of Dexter as the premise of the series. I agree that there doesn't need to be a serial killer. I also don't necessarily think it has to be like a police procedural about like catching Dexter or anything. But 'cause it could even be like a more like metaphorical, like he's having to like emotionally answer for all of his crimes. But that's sort of where my head is at. If they do uh, an open ended ending because they're fishing for like 2 or 3 seasons, then well, I think your pitch is good, and that could still maybe lead to like the second or third season, like the actual finale going similarly.
Yeah, I only threw that in there because I can't imagine them not putting some kind of a stinger. I mean, what I would do if I was them is I wouldn't be fishing for another season. I would be fishing for TV movies or something in the vein of what they just did with Breaking Bad, with El Camino, or the Psych movies that they're putting out or something. Like, this is something this is like a well that you can go back to every couple of years, but either way you end it, right?
Yeah.
I don't know if that's necessary, and I agree with you that if I had it my way, I'm obviously not the creative here, but if I had it my way, I would want them to just end it, because I think that's important. It's just so important that a show end on decent terms and through a story. I agree that no police procedural, literally no serial killer. It doesn't have to be a group of serial killers. It doesn't have to be anything. I mean, you could throw Dexter into a Harry role for an entire season. That might be cool. I know they've played around with that a little bit in season 8. They played around with it in the books, but they never really explored that side of his character. So you have him do that, maybe making a grave mistake with someone, or whoever he's training makes a big mistake, gets caught, he takes the rap and gets put in jail. But not on death row or anything, but just ends up in not metaphorical jail, but an actual jail for a crime he didn't commit, but he's going to be there. I mean, that might be a little bit disappointing for a lot of people who want to see him dead, but I don't know. I think that there's so few things that you can do with Dexter's character right now, after so many years have gone by, that would feel genuine. That the idea of ending it, tying a bow around it, and just giving it to the fans is such a tall order, especially with the way people treat the ending of the show. There's nothing to me that sounds like it would be great. So you may be just giving it a little stinger, thinking that maybe there could be something else down the road for this show or the universe or something, is a way to pick that up and run with it. But that's one of my biggest fears, is if the entire point of doing this is to right the ship and right the wrongs that people have with the finale, I think that's a much harder reality than just we want to bring it back because we got a good story. Because if you want to end it, you have to end it, and that's going to be hard.
And it's like, it's difficult because like with the things that we're pitching, it's like, all right, well, we said we wanted Hannah McKay and Harrison back in some form or another. How do they fit into that? It's a pretty difficult writing scenario, I think.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I think you need Debra.
Yeah, I saw someone in one of your comments, I think it was, say that like Deb could like fill the Harry role as like sort of Dexter's new voice in his head, and I think that would actually be a really cool idea.
That's the best idea, really. That's the only way that you can theoretically use her if you're not just doing flashbacks. She's the only one who really needs to come back, just those two working off of each other. And if not her, literally if not her, then nobody else. If you can't get Jennifer Carpenter back to play Debra as a Dark Passenger Harry type role in this revival, then just make it about Dexter in his self-imposed prison having to deal with this crap all by himself. So Hannah, Harrison, Batista, Masuka, Quinn, all of them. No, I don't want to see them. That's what I would say.
You know, it would be the worst case scenario because you know, you talked about how Michael C. Hall and Jennifer Carpenter were divorced and that whole plot line. Like, do you know if they're still on like good like terms these days? I
have no idea. I don't follow that. I don't follow it that heavily. I would imagine that it would be a really good deal for both of them just to show up. I don't think either of them have done anything long lasting since the show ended. So I'm sure if they asked her, she would show up.
I hope that's the case because I just kind of had like a moment of clarity. Like, wouldn't it be funny if they brought back an old character to be the new Dark Passenger, but it was like LaGuardia or something? Oh God. Or Dokes.
Well, you know what? You know, on that note, what they could do is just bring back everyone as Dark Passengers. Like, they don't have to go.
Okay, you know what? I changed my mind. This is actually a great idea.
Yeah. Like, you don't have to go back to Miami, but you can bring back the cast as people talking to him, because that's fairly well established throughout the entire show. Like I said, they brought back Brian for an episode. Bring back Brian. Like, that'd be great. I don't know.
Well, that'd actually be really good if Brian and Meg, or Meg, what?
Shut up, Meg.
Deb. Brian and Deb were like, if you had like sort of like a duality, like angel and devil on your shoulder kind of Dark Passengers.
Mm-hmm. That, yeah.
And that'd actually be good.
Oh, yeah, like, and maybe like the whole season he's, you know, theoretically the whole season he'd be going back and forth as to like who he should really be, still dealing with that, because that's like the one thing that I kind of liked about the self-imposed prison idea from the finale is he hadn't really changed. Nothing about him has changed. He's just decided that I'm going to be this way. Like, I'm going to shut myself off from the rest of the world so I don't have to make these decisions, but he hasn't resolved anything that he was trying to figure out from the entire series. Like, he doesn't know how to not be himself. And so he still needs to kill. He knows he shouldn't kill. And one of the things I take away is he's telling himself, affirming and making that decision not to kill after everything that happened in the first 8 seasons. So obviously he's still going to be struggling with that, and having it several years out from when the show left, that might be interesting to show, like, how much he's dealing with that and like how he's breaking down from it at this point. Like, I have to kill. There's that line, he's like, oh, I really need to stab something. Like, that's who he is, right?
Yeah. You know what else would be a good line? Here's the one like actual line I'll pitch with this premise is you could have a callback to the end of season 1 when Dexter was killing Brian, and right before he slit his throat, Brian was yelling that you cannot be a killer and a hero, and sort of have like bring back that line and have that sort of be the message that Brian is trying to, you know, the Dark Passenger version of Brian is trying to feed to Dexter, you know?
Mm-hmm. I like that, actually, because like I said, I just recently rewatched that one, and I remember him saying that. So, yeah, we could talk about this literally all day, but pretty much I think we'll end it there. Charlotte, thanks for coming out and taking the time to do this. It's been a long video, but definitely.
Yeah, thank you for having me. This has been fun.
Definitely worth talking about it. I hope everyone has enjoyed it, especially the champions who made it this far into it. This is definitely going to be an ongoing discussion. We have no idea what this season is going to bring, and you know, this is an imperfect series. There's a lot of great to it, there's a lot of bad to it, and the idea of getting another shot at the finale is something really exciting and worth talking about, but there's a lot of pitfalls that could really mess it up and make it harder or even worse than it was previously. I hope they don't fall into that well, but we'll have to just wait and see. Hope everyone is having a fantastic day. Like I said, you can go down to the description section below and check out Charlotte's channel for the AMVs that she creates, and hopefully maybe we can have her back on this channel to talk more about Breaking Bad and maybe Saul at some point. I know she's a big fan. So hope everyone is having a fantastic day. It's been real. So before we get into this, either watch this video and then go click the link, or click the link so you can have a better context of what I'm going to be talking about here, because I'm not going to go over everything. It's a very long article, but definitely worth the read. And if you don't follow this series or this creator, then make sure to go do that either on Twitter or just on Bloody Disgusting. But in the article from Jason Jenkins, you can find the latest entry of his Phantom Limb series, where he talks to creators about projects and horror movie related content that could have been. And in this article, he's talking to executive producer Scott Buck about a potential revival or continuation of the Dexter franchise that was in the works basically before the original series stopped airing. I mean, it's kind of crazy. But before we get into that, I wanted to take just a couple of minutes to talk about the comments of Gary Levine, the president of entertainment over at Showtime, and what he had to say about a potential for a second season of Dexter New Blood. Our goal with Dexter New Blood was to give the series a proper conclusion, and I couldn't be more proud of how it turned out, both creatively and the response to it, which was off the charts. As you can tell, it was a good amount of closure, he continued. We accomplished what we hoped to do beyond our wildest dreams. Right now, we are still enjoying the closure of Dexter. It's not uninteresting to continue it, but you have to be judicious about going on with existing IP versus creating new IP. We don't do it a whole lot, and when we do it, we do it carefully. At this point, I can't say definitively either way about it. This to me comes across as some fairly normal doublespeak when it comes to the creation of media, especially with big IP like Dexter, in such a way that it seems rather implausible for Showtime not to want to bring back Dexter, because it was pretty much their biggest show in over a decade. I guess somewhat of a caveat there is that Yellow Jackets, the show that they premiered alongside Dexter New Blood, was their second biggest show, and that's giving them a lot of hope for the future. And their mentality at this point could possibly be, yeah, we ended that one thing that we were kind of keeping on the back burner for a long time, but it was such a really good lead-in for this one particular television show that could be a dominating force in the streaming wars here in the next 2 or 3 years. And quite literally, guys, if you haven't watched Yellow Jackets, watch Yellow Jackets, especially if you watch Dexter New Blood and you have your Showtime subscription already. There's just no better show that I've seen over in 2021, or maybe even in 2022, depending on where you kind of rank that season. You know, it ended in 2022, so there's that. The big point there being is Dexter New Blood was a huge hit, like way bigger than what I think Showtime was expecting, especially in this modern day. Dexter was one of those first shows that blew up out of nowhere, and it was kind of like the hallmark of what a cable television show could be at the time. But obviously, so much has changed since then that Dexter New Blood just simply can't be the same type of show that the original Dexter was. So yeah, a major influx of subscribers and people watching the series is a major boom for the network. And I'm wondering if somebody in the back room is kicking themselves, or whether somebody even got fired over the fact that, hey, this shouldn't have been 10 episodes. This should have been 20. We should have done 2 seasons to get it to 10 seasons. That way people, would continue to renew their subscription until they got the next season. No, you had to do 10 episodes and just pretty much sweep it all under the rug, especially ending in the way they did. You know what? Look, I'm not going to get into that because I'm still processing it. Obviously, Dexter was so influential and very important to me that, I had come to learn to love the original ending, and now I have to kind of find my way back to the series after the way they decided to end it. And that's not even a critique on the entire season, it's just the last 45 minutes of the last episode, right? So guys, take with that what you will before we go into the rest of this. The point there being is I believe that Showtime is definitely biting their nails right now and trying to figure out how they're going to continue this going forward. In fact, there was already some speculation and even polls put up from people who subscribe to Showtime streaming service that asked people, hey, if we were going to do something, what would you like to watch? Do you want to watch Dexter, Harrison, Angela, Debra somehow? I don't know, but we're willing to hear you out because there's obviously a lot of interest there. That's part of this, is they know they can't give up on a good IP. So they're not going to, but now they've written themselves into a corner, and I'm sure they're regretting it every single day. With that being said, I want to go back to this Phantom Limbs article over on Bloody Disgusting and talk about a potential revival for Dexter that we never got, and why I feel this new decision with Clyde Phillips and Michael C. Hall coming back and wanting to definitively end Dexter is so strange for AMC. I guess before we get into this, the only way it makes sense for Showtime to have done what they did with New Blood is they came in and Michael C. Hall says, this is the only way I want to continue with this story, is if I die in the end, right? This character is done. You can't bring him back for one thing or another, and that's how you're going to definitively end Dexter. That's fine. I understand that perspective. But as a business decision, it makes a lot more sense with what the Phantom Limbs article goes into, saying that they were not allowed to end Dexter definitively while the series was wrapping up its final season because Showtime knew that they wanted to bring back Dexter in a 9th season or some kind of revival later down the line, and they didn't want to deprive themselves of that fact. And there is just a lot of stuff to go over when it comes to this particular article. I will let you go read it if you want, but just some of the specifics are Dexter is still supposed to be living in the Northeast. He's not supposed to be a trucker. That was always just like, this is what he's doing in the meantime as he's trying to find himself. But instead of going to a bait shop, he was going to be a paramedic, which obviously works a lot better with what he was already doing, but it also raises a whole lot of questions because him just doing a menial job in the revival makes a lot of sense. Like, he doesn't have to prove or do anything, right? I imagine, I'm not an EMT, but I imagine that you would have to prove yourself in one way or another, especially your identification. And yeah, that would have been a little bit messy, but the power of television writing, I think they could have gotten around it. There's also some discussion about whether or not Debra would be back and whether or not Harry would be back, and the idea of Dexter talking to himself, being the narrator of the story, and whether or not they would bring that back, and why it was necessary for the story in the previous season versus what you would do in the revival. It's all really interesting, but I wanted to mainly focus on this. The idea basically was that Dexter, several years later, had resisted killing all these years. He does get at least some satisfaction working as a paramedic, but he's still living in the Pacific Northwest somewhere, which seems to be the hunting grounds of serial killers. So some big new bad starts terrorizing the area, and Dexter, he's telling himself, just out of curiosity, he's going to look into this. He's certainly not going to do anything about it, but he finds himself gradually being pulled into it more until finally the challenge is this person has to go. So in the article, Buck does say that Showtime allowed him to write a pilot that was then given to Michael C. Hall. He then says that Michael C. Hall didn't really respond and nothing really came of this. And I guess either the way you're looking at this either says this is the quality of the writing, so just what he's pitching sounds really interesting, but the execution just wasn't there, which, I mean, given some of the later seasons of Dexter, who can really blame Michael C. Hall? With that being said, though, I think we have to look throughout the entirety of this article and see what was being said between the lines. Primarily that Buck was operating under the impression that Showtime was never going to give up on the Dexter character. I mean, look at what we've just been talking about over the course of this entire video. After that ending, they're still talking about potentially having it come back, which is crazy. So basically his idea was to have Dexter kind of reappear in either mini season arcs or maybe even TV movies for the foreseeable future, just continuously bringing back Dexter. Because as he alludes to, you can't have Dexter be caught because that ends the series. You can't have everybody know who Dexter is because that fundamentally alters any future iteration of the series, making it that you're on the run instead of doing your daily, everyday routine, just in a different location. The reason I like this pitch more than what we got with Dexter New Blood is primarily that. It is less definitive. I feel like Scott Buck does make a relatively interesting point. With Dexter, you can't have your cake and eat it too. AMC didn't want them to end the show in such a way that they couldn't bring him back, so you couldn't do the most logical conclusion that the show required. The problem there is, it would have felt a lot more genuine had it ended that way with the original run. But if you're going to bring it back and end it the way they did, then it just kind of feels a little deflating. Like, none of these characters were established enough. And no, I don't care about what they did with Harrison. None of these characters are established enough to get that moment. No matter the forced perspective that they were trying to do with that season, it just didn't work. But if you're going to have Dexter come back in maybe a 9th season, some kind of revival, and then a 10th season down the line, and then maybe an 11th season or some kind of TV movie at that point, and you can tell individual stories and allow Dexter to meet new people, build up relationships throughout that, even if he's jumping around, build a broader narrative to the point where you get to a reasonable conclusion and the characters that he's interacting with make sense to end the story there, then it would have been way more satisfying than doing something like they did with New Blood. And look, I haven't gone out of my way to see exactly how many people hated the ending versus how many people love the ending. I feel like it's pretty much split half and half from pretty much everybody that I've talked to. And as a fan, I feel like that's what you want. You want a divisive ending that's still satisfying to at least somewhat of a majority of people or very much close to it. The original ending didn't really have that for a lot of people. So yeah, I don't think what they did was a mistake. I just obviously think that this would have been a much more interesting direction because at least it had the caveat of knowing that you couldn't just simply come back out of nowhere with a completely new cast of characters and end it in the most abrupt way possible, because that's not what fans want by and large, or maybe even just a very vocal minority of fans. But it's also something that doesn't serve the overall story, and then the network is going to be clamoring to figure out some kind of direction for a future continuation, because at the end of the day, people just wanted Dexter back. And I think they were right the first time. Like, people didn't want Dexter to die. They didn't want him to, be caught or anything like that, because it kind of ruins the mystique. But if you were going to do that, it probably should have been at the end of the very first series and not in some kind of half thought out continuation like they did with New Blood.